Hello, Neil here from Redflare, and I'm going to go and show you some of my techniques and detail around the resin base that I've casted now. This is one of the 1/12 scale bases for just general kind of Star Wars models and things like that. And so this is about 84 mil on either side. It's a square base, but it's got a lot of texture and detail. And what I've done, as you can see here, is I have cast up the base. I've given it a little quick coat of primer, but really, the detail here is there's a sandy texture. And little kind of rock details and things here, and then what I've done is I've casted and molded a separate rock that is going to be placed here. So what I wanted to kind of do is just go through some detail, really kind of show you some of the textures and techniques to make the rocks and the sand look very realistic before you start to add your models. So as you can see, I have just added a little bit of super glue to this rock, and as you can see, there's a little bit of detail around the edge I've got to fill in, but that's now mounted on there nice and solidly into the position that I want. So the rock is made so it can be repositioned or used on other models, but this now should be in a different position. So it's showing, certainly for options, it can be orientated around the other way if you feel like it, but that was the way I wanted this on this model. So there we are. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to seal around the bottom and apply some just plastic filler, various model fillers that I have. So one of the favourite fillers that I tend to use is the Vallejo. This is plastic putty. It's an acrylic resin filler. Sorry about the light on there, but it's really useful because it has a fine tip and allows me to just squeeze the tube and get some detail in very small places. So it allows me a lot of precision, and you can do quite a few different things when you're applying. A lot of the other tubed fillers don't give you this much detail with such a fine nib, so it's really useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around the base of this, just filling some of the gaps in, and I'm going to prepare this ready for the next stage. So I'll come back in a minute when I've done that, and I'll show you how I've done it. Now the great thing about this Vallejo filler is I can use a paintbrush with a little bit of water on it, and I can smooth off the edges really quickly. You don't want to use too much water, but just enough to kind of wet the filler down. So that's what I'm doing here. There's a little tiny gap there and things. So what I'm planning to do with this, obviously, I want to go for a very red texture on the kind of sand, and the rocks again, a very reddish and orange tone. But I want to put a little bit of brush and foliage at the bottom. So really what I want to do is leave a few gaps and a few cracks, because obviously I'll fill those with a bit of detail. But really just wanted to apply several washes, and my technique I'm going to show you really is how those washes are applied. So I've got a couple of gaps here that I'm just going to fill in. Tiny bit of filler just to fill the last bits down here. And there's a tiny hole in the bottom there I can see. One down there. Probably never be seen in the final model, but it's always nice to include it. So just dab that in there. Obviously put the lid back on. And the reason why I'm dabbing this is I want that organic feel. If you leave the filler on too much, then it's going to take some of the texture away. So what I'm trying to do here and around this edge is lose this filler here, because that's filling in some of the detail. So I'm going to kind of dry that off and let that dry, and it will allow me to then put kind of lots of different washes on this. So I'm going to just clear that off so it's nice and sealed around the base there. So I hope you can see that. There, good. Right, we're back, and I've let the plastic putty now dry for about 20 minutes. It's probably longer than it needed to, but I wanted to make sure I got a nice even kind of dryness to it before I applied the next coat. So what I'm going to use is Tamiya's Nato Brown. It's just a general kind of colour. I wanted to give that base detail. I wanted to use before I started to apply the red richness of the sand, just applying some brown. So as you can see here, I've started to apply it pretty much neat from the bottle, and I'm not really caring where it goes on this. I'm just making sure that it is covering as much as I can on the model here. So as you can see, being quite liberal and splashing it all over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to apply this. Nice colour. Some areas are thicker than others, but it doesn't really matter as long as I'm getting in all those nooks and crannies, all those crevices, and more importantly stippling it. This is just a not one of my best brushes, but I'm stippling it into the sandy texture just to make sure that it sinks in completely. One of the things that you're going to need to worry about, and it may need a couple of coats as well, but don't be afraid. Make sure that it goes into the detail of the base that you're making the application, the paint application to. So there we are. Definitely probably going to have to worry about painting another coat afterwards. Especially when the paint dries, you'll get a different colour as well. So we are starting to paint that rock. Let's just leave that tin there. That's it. Pop, pick it up. I'm not worried too much about the sides either, because the detail around here I'm going to paint up in a lot more detail. There's lots under there. You can probably just see getting into that bit there. Use a different brush just to get into that kind of underhang there. Now it's interesting that that underhang has come out completely as part of the resin cast. So you've got to be worried when sometimes you create resin casts that you don't create too many overhangs and underhangs. That certainly is one that is okay, because it's small enough in there that it's not had to worry too much about the the resin and the silicone mold. Depends if you're molding your own or you're buying one of my bases. So there we are, making sure that I'm just getting all of that in there, and this is definitely going to need a second coat, I think. But you can see now that that's now looking a lot nicer than it was. That boring grey, that boring grey. As I say, this is one of first of many layers that will go on here. Probably end up putting maybe even close to 10 different layers. You know, you'll start to texture with these base colors to give it some depth. Then obviously you're going to highlight colors, use base shadow tones, especially around the rocks. You know, they're where you're going to spend a lot of detail, and I'll show you the techniques for that as well. So as I say, this at the moment is looking pretty plain, pretty boring, but I'm going to continue on this one and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Right, just a quick one. I have laid down the first coat. It's still wet, as you can see. It's very wet, but it's drying around the edges and things. So I'm just going to leave it for a little while. There's still some touch up and detail, I think, in terms of filling that I want to do. There's a tiny gap. I can't really show you too much detail. There's a tiny gap at the bottom here. But I'm going to get rid of that in a minute, so yeah, reapply. But yeah, so I'm just going to leave that to dry. These paints are pretty good, they don't take too long, but obviously I want to make a good job. Now, when you do this, I mean, don't be afraid to experiment. One of the kind of challenges that you might face is you're too afraid to use a particular color because the color's not right. There are various different products out there, from Vallejo to Green Stuff World, and some of the paints out there are really nice. I've tended to use some textured paints and crackling paints from Green Stuff Worlds, mixed with just standard Vallejo and other brands, and AK is some of the things I use. So, you know, mix and match. You know, whatever feels right to you, but you know, think about the tones, think about the colors, do a bit of research, make sure that you understand what a really kind of reddish desert would look like, or if you're going for a more of a sandy desert, you know, try and do some research. You know, there's Death Valley and other photography and scenery out there that you could really get a lot of material that gives you some idea of what you need to be painting. So, you know, take lots of reference. Make sure that you have that you know, on your computer, on your screen, and just, you know, mix and match against that as you're applying those colors. But first, as I say, put down your base colors, then start to apply and layer up and layer up and layer up. Okay, I'm going to come back to this when this is all dry, and we will continue shortly. The rough now dried, some redwood brown for world on some, you know, there's the brown underneath and there's the red tone on top. It's very what do you call it, shiny at the moment, but that's because I'm going to be applying these additional colors. So I have kind of yellow ochre, wood, middle stone, sorry, and some orange brown, and then lastly some peach flesh. So, you know, different colors really, but they're here for me to kind of really look at you know, giving it a bit of texture, because one thing you need to do is you need to layer this up. So it's important that once you actually apply different tones, different textures to this, you want to bring out the color, and it can take 10 or 11 different layers to really kind of make it work. So this is kind of the starting color, the base color, the deep colors on the bottom, and then working up to the highlights on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start to apply the first tone. I'm probably going to the middle stone colour by the Vallejo, and it's an airbrush colour, but I'm going to apply it with a brush, so I'm going to do that in a second. Okay, so I've got a large brush. I hope you can see that there. Just put some of the paint on. Let's put the paint in there. So a little dab of paint here, and I'm going to brush most of that off. Get rid of this here. So I've got a little bit of paint on here, and firstly just apply this. So that's you can see now that's going on, and immediately it's starting to take that really red tone off. So do it really randomly. And it's surprising how fast and how much paint still resides on a brush when you're doing this. So this technique is known as dry brushing, if you don't know already. And what it's doing is it's just picking out the surface details and highlights while leaving the low lights and the detail underneath. A bit more paint. So again, don't be afraid to apply this as much as you need, because what you're going for is an overall effect. Now I want the rocks as well to be a slightly different colour, so what I'm going to do is, once this has been applied, I am going to make sure that I kind of choose a different tone for the rocks. Because they'll be slightly different. I'm just rushing this at the moment, but and what this does is it brings out a lot of the detail. From the moulding you can see lots of cracks and crevices, and you know, it's important that when you apply this you get in as many areas as possible to really pull out those levels of detail. So you can see immediately that that's already pulled a lot of the redness, the redness from this this redwood brown. So that's pretty much, you know, toned back. There's going to be a lot more colouring that's needed here. So once you put your figure on the base, that then is going to make a you know, a scene for your model, and it's going to allow you to really kind of present your model in a nice way. This is just a wide brush that I'm using. It's got a good set of bristles, and it allows me to apply a lot of paint where I need it. So there. But I've still got a lot of redness there, so I want to take that out. So the next colour, obviously, that I want to do is a slightly lighter colour, maybe the wood, or even the orange brown. I'm going to leave the orange brown for now. I'm not sure if that's the right colour to apply, but certainly the wood is going to be one that I want to kind of add in now. So I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes and then come back to it. Okay, this is now dry, so I'm going to apply the wood colour, which is a lot yellower than the middle stone that we applied before. And as you can see, as I'm brushing it on, actually it's a little bit subtle, but there is a colour difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply this on the ground. because I'm going to worry about the rocks in a minute. But as you can see, so I'm using the brush edge to really get into the under the rocks. That little bit there I'll worry about later. So I'm putting a little bit of paint on, and then I'm taking a lot of that paint off straight away using a piece of just paper towel. As you can see, just taking that paint off to reduce down the amount of paint that I've got on the brush. You don't want to put lots of paint on. So this technique, as I say, is called dry brushing for a reason, and it is down simply to get that detail on top. Need a bit more paint. Now, as I say, it's up to you what colours you use. The thing is as well is you want to really give it that lived in look, you know, that desert feel here. There, so we can see that it's a lot yellower now. Again, I'm going to let that dry, and then we're going to put another layer on. Now, the one thing that I like to do is I like to experiment when I put the paints on. So in my mind, I have an idea of how that's going to apply. As I said, you know, I spent a bit of time with a mood board and looked at how I was going to, you know, apply that by doing a lot of research online. But at the end of the day, it's about experimentation. So don't be afraid to experiment and have fun. That's the most important thing when you're doing this. So anyway, paint's dry, so I'm going to go back to adding the next layer. Right, peach flesh this time. Green Stuff World, peach flesh. There's quite a few different versions of peach flesh around. This one is a lot kind of paler in colour. You're going to show that there. Hopefully the camera's going to pick that up. And it's going to pick out. It's going to really kind of pick those points up. So a little bit of paint on the brush first to really kind of there, and apply that on the paper. And again, I'm just doing the sand. So one thing that I'm looking at here is these different highlights, and you can see it's cooling the colour. There, you know, that redness is completely gone, but it's still there as a little tint. So, you know, this is much more like a sandy area now, and it is definitely. But there's still areas here and here where it's a lot deeper. Good bit of colour in there. Good bit of colour where the sand's built up. Not needing much of this. This is one colour that's not needed too much. I'm going to give a little bit of texture on the rocks. So this is where I'm starting to apply more of the dry brushing effect to the rock to pick out little areas like in there. You know, look at that. A tiny bit more. As I say, you don't need much paint on this at all. You can see just applying a little bit of paint brings out a huge amount of deal. So really feather it on. Feather it on. Yeah, some nice red rocks. And this is going to really stand out. I mean, I'm going to use C3PO, Bandai's C3PO for this. So obviously he's golden, and I wanted to have a bit of contrast with that. And you can see now that just 3 layers later, that red and that deep brown has really gone. You can see some of the red still in there, you know, the detail in here, but really, you know, that is gone from the base now. So what the base needs is it just needs some additional kind of light colors. So actually I'm going to start to apply some pale flesh. The reason why I'm looking at this is it's still got a little bit of brown tints and tones in it, but it is very much whiter and lighter. You can apply a little bit, so I'm going to stipple this on very small amounts. So I'm going to again let this dry in a few minutes, and then apply that. I also have some Dwarven Flesh as well from Green Stuff World, slightly different colour. As I say, what you need is a good range of different browns and tones, tints, reds, so that you can really kind of work on those. But if you're really stuck, then you can make, you know, blend your own. You need some core colours, and you can mix some yellows, whites and reds together to give your own. But obviously if you can make the investment, get some of these colours yourself. So that's the next layer. So again, let this dry and come back to it in a few minutes. Right, a few minutes later, and we have hopefully the base and the paint is dry. So I'm going to apply the pale flesh from Green Stuff World, as I mentioned, and again, you know, just very lightly, my tiny amount. And what I want to do is pick out areas where they are slightly highlighted, and as you can see now, this is really making areas where it's showing that highlight, and it is just very light touch. Now obviously this will dry, so it's going on, and you may need a couple of coats of this. Don't worry about the rocks for now, because again, there we are. So this is really coming. In fact, I'm going to put some additional highlights on the rocks, because these rocks really. So I have created these rocks. They were cast and molded, and the whole base was cast and molded, and they were made from various materials and kind of assembled, and then, as I say, I've cast them in resin, so they're really solid and robust. But they're giving a lot of effect and a lot of detail. They're really nice in the whoops in the way that the crevices and detail. You know, as you would find a rock in the desert, so the Death Valley or something like that, you'd find some rocks there. So, you know, I went for something that looks a little bit alien as well. I wanted to show, you know, highly weathered stones and rocks, but at the same time something that's got a little bit of character. Yeah, tone down a bit, so there we are. A little bit more on the base, just to pull out a few areas in really pale colour. And it's really coming along now. You can see the difference from what it was with just essentially a big blob of brown. This now has got a lot of definition, a lot of colour, a lot of texture to it. It really got some depth, and it's got, in my mind, it's coming along, and it's going to be a really nice base. Now, the other things that I'm going to do is I'm going to add some various kind of foliage and little bits of brush, essentially, that we would find on in these nooks and crevices of the rocks, where moisture would have collected and plants would have grown. So again, in certain areas I'm going to do that, and I'll come on to that after I finish the painting. But really, just a part of the diorama base is to give it a sense of creativity. So what you want to do is make it your own, and really work really hard to shape and evolve this. But as I was saying before, experimentation is part of the modelling process, and we want you to kind of understand that there is a step-by-step logical approach to the way that you build these layers up. But beyond that, it's your work, your own, and as much as you goes into this work, and over time you'll get used to building these bases and creating more and more work. So I hope my videos are helpful. I'm going to come back to this in a minute when this is dry, and again we'll apply some more colours. So hope you've enjoyed it so far. I'll speak to you soon later. Right, now I'm going to apply some yellow ochre. Again, Vallejo Air, which is great for your airbrush, but I'm applying it neat with a brush. Now the reason why I've chosen this yellow ochre is I want to concentrate a little bit on the rocks now. I want to bring some of the detail out on the rocks, and so I feel that at the moment everything's looking a bit samey, and so I've got a smaller brush now. Again, dry brushing here. But with the yellow ochre I can kind of just give it a slightly different tint. I'm not sure how much you can see on the video here, but it is bringing a slightly, there's a little rock there. Now normally I do wear gloves, I'm not right now. And the reason why I wear gloves is to protect the model from fingerprints. Doesn't matter too much on a base, but when you're painting a figure, it's always important to not ruin the figure with a big smudgy fingerprint. The other side of it is just clean up. It's a lot easier to clean, and wash your hands and stuff after you've finished if you've been wearing gloves, especially now during COVID. I guess everybody really needs to kind of be a bit more careful about what they do. Now, as you say, one of the great things about the hobby world at the moment is a lot more people have got time to spend on their benches. So again, just as you can see now, just applying a tiny tint of this yellow is giving a lot of difference. I will take some photos afterwards. But adding the yellow over here just gives the rocks a slightly different feel to the sand, and enables you to, again, you know, do some different creative things with your model. And I'd be keen to kind of see as well, you know, how you kind of look at this. You know, you can do it with obviously deeper and kind of grey tones, so marble and granite, and you know, other different rock tones, or you know, similar to this where you've gone reds. I just want to get in there. So again, you know, lots of application, but it's really coming together now. And now, you know, applying those slightly yellow tints to here means that those have come up, the rocks have come up in a different way. There's a little bit in there I want to finish off. There. So again, you know, still got the reds in there, still got the tones, the layers that have been building up, and it's just about looking and applying things, and you know, really coming to a happy place, I guess, with how I feel about looking at this. So yeah, again, give it a few minutes to dry, and I'll give it another coat. I am going to apply a bit more pale flesh, again, because it's good for highlights. I feel that there's a little bit more work that needs to be done around the stones. So again, I've got the small brush, tiny amount here, just to bring out some of the detail here. But I don't want to lose that yellowness, so I'm just being very cautious about which bit I apply it to. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to get some much lighter colours. There. So again, just really quick and simple, but don't overdo it. You know, one thing you want to do is apply this in a way that you're happy with, but it doesn't saturate. So it's kind of making these tiny detail changes. Now, one of the last colours I'm going to add in is a light brown grey by MIG. Again, airbrush, but applying it by standard brush. And that's the thing about the airbrush colours, is they're really good for both. But the light brown, light brown grey, just has a light texture to it, and again, you know, applying some detail here, just to pull out some of these edge colours on the bricks and the rocks. Giving it that paler colour. Now, the one thing about paint as well is obviously when it dries, it goes slightly cooler and duller. So don't be afraid to add in a couple of coats if you feel you're not happy with it. And the reason why I'm applying this yes, it's giving. A little. There we are, that's a little bit of pale flesh again just here. You can see now that they are a lot duller. Just a tiny bit more of the grey in here. Just to take that down. And that's really kind of dulled a lot of that definition from the reds. Just a tiny bit of stippling there. Just to bring that out. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm going to clean up the sides. I'm not too worried about the sides for now. But there we are. Okay. And then again, leave that to dry, and we will come back to that later.